It is Casey Callanan, your podcast producer slash host, filling in today for Lucas McCann. Of course, this podcast brought to you by the friends at Big Red M, and I am so excited to welcome Courtney Clark to the show, a former guest, Randy Pettington.
Randy is the owner of Pennington Performance Group and the author of Results Rule.
Randy Pettington reached out, told us we had to have Courtney on. She's amazing. Courtney, welcome to the show. Just tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Well, I'm a researcher and a speaker on resilience, but I don't think that resilience comes from positivity. Oh, you can do anything you put your mind to, but from adaptability. So that's what my research focuses on.
Courtney talks a lot about like the downfalls of being inflexible, just clinging to the old ways, status quo, just kind of that really rigid company culture that may be present in the association space pretty often. Tell us about your work with associations and what your reflections are, having spoke at so many of these events and worked with so many association professionals so closely for so long.
Yeah, I keynote a ton of association events. And I used to work in the nonprofit space, also doing events. So I have a lot of familiarity with the rut that we can get into in the way we've always done it. And so this is true for association professionals. It's also true for the industries that association professionals serve. When I started doing this work, I used to say I work with industries that are facing change. Casey, what industries aren't facing change these days? It's all of them. And we can't keep doing things the way we've always done them. It's not going to succeed. And I think everybody knows that. That's part of what was so exciting about this research for me, was discovering that people really do understand that you have to be adaptable in order to succeed. We found that when people were ranking like what qualities make you successful, adaptability came in second. But the behaviors of adaptability, things like being able to come up with another plan, letting go of goals that are no longer working out, that ranked at the bottom. So we like adaptability as a concept, but when it comes right down to the nitty-gritty of doing it, we're a lot more hesitant because it's that cultural, quitters never win. Keep going, never give up.
Back us up. How did you get to this point of your career? And then I want to know a little bit more about that research.
Totally by accident, like any good career, Casey. I was working in the nonprofit space and I had gone back to grad school and I started doing research for grad school. I was researching, specifically my research was the role of philanthropy, giving in helping people heal from trauma. Because I am a 4-time World Trade Center related cancer survivor. And then because of the cancer, so if it had not been for my exposure on 9/11, I would not have developed cancer. But if it hadn't been for cancer, they never would have found the brain aneurysm that was about to hemorrhage. So I care very deeply about, how do people recover from these events? That's probably where I got so interested in resilience, but I didn't know it yet. In grad school, I loved researching, and several people, when they got hearing me talk about how passionate I was about my research, and this is the research that became my first book, The Giving Prescription, people said, you should be a speaker too. And I said, that is a job, isn't it? So I combined two things that turns out I'm pretty good at, the research. And I don't just do primary research. I also look at secondary research and stuff that's scientific, but it's hidden. It hasn't been pulled out so that we normal people can apply it and use it in our practical everyday life. And so that's what I love to do.
Predominantly, I want to ask you about the two major national research studies on adaptability that pretty much is the underlying context for a lot about what you speak on. So can you give us a kind of a rundown of what the takeaways are that we can actually apply from that?
For sure. So in my third book, Revisionary Thinking, that is the research study I did several years ago. where we talk about like, how do you change your plans but still reach your goals? What does that process look like? And then my new research, the book, The Shortcut, is it just came out into spring of 2026. The idea there is that in fact, sometimes we do have to let go of goals that aren't working out. And it's that grit that is keeping us from being adaptable. Not that grit is bad. Sometimes we need to persevere, but sometimes we need to pivot. And so the research here is helping organizations, helping individuals understand, one, why they should be willing to let go of something that's not working, but also identifying when is something not working, and then how do you quit and then find something else that's going to be even more successful. I'm not trying to tell people, don't have perseverance, just give up quickly and easily. It's not that. But it's, hey, if you're just throwing good money after bad, if you're using up your resources on some goal that's not working out, those resources could be put towards better use that will make you more successful.
It is very difficult because of something I think a lot of us are familiar with, especially those of us who are in management, leadership, entrepreneurship, and that's the sunk cost fallacy. The hard work that's got you to this point, you have to kind of cut ties with. So tell me about how you deal with that and explaining what that is if people aren't familiar.
Sure. So sunk cost fallacy, it is a cognitive bias in your brain thinking like, oh, well, I've already invested so much. If I give up now, I'll have wasted that time. I love the analogy of like, if you're on a train and it's going the wrong direction, the longer you stay on the train, the further you're getting away from your destination. But so many people think, oh, I don't want to have made that be a waste. So let me just try a little harder. So sunk cost fallacy actually happens. I found this in the research. There are two mindsets that your brain has. You have a evaluative mindset, which is what happens before you've taken action towards a goal. When you're like, is this a good goal? Right? Is this the college I want to go to? You are in an evaluative mindset. You're weighing your options. The second you take one step towards pursuing a goal, once you take action, your brain flips into implementation mindset. And implementation mindset does not want to be judged or evaluated. I think of it like, the Energizer Bunny from those old battery commercials. It's just going to keep going. It's like, don't stop me, don't question me. So evaluative mindset and implementation mindset is why sunk cost fallacy happens. We'd be so much better off if we did a lot more evaluation, looked at our resources, realistically looked at our resources, what resources is it going to take, set some benchmarks so we can really monitor, hey, am I making the progress that I should be making? If we don't do all that while we're still in evaluative mindset, our implementation mindset is going to override it. We're going to be like, oh, I don't need benchmarks. I'll know if I'm being successful, or, well, okay, I know I don't have this resource, but if I just keep going, maybe I'll be able to generate that resource. We talk ourselves into never give up.
Makes a ton of sense. I know that through your work, you're trying to get at a lot of the misunderstandings of resilience that are out there. It's one of your missions to correct a lot of the misunderstandings with resilience. Can you talk to me about identifying what that most typical misunderstanding is?
Well, I think a common misunderstanding is that people don't like change. That's not what we found. We found that people embrace the idea of adaptability, but like I mentioned early, it's that they don't embrace the behaviors, the actions of adaptability. That's the gap that we have to close. For many, many people, we don't have to extol the virtues of change. for example, at an opening keynote at an association conference, maybe as much as we thought we did. People get it. But what they have is a gap between what they want and what they want to do. So we have to equip them with the tools to actually behave in the ways that they say they want to behave. We actually have to show them, okay, what does it look like to be adaptable? It's okay to let go of the way we've always done it, because here's what you're building next. If people don't know what they're building next, it's really hard to then get off a path that's a really familiar path with no idea what the new path could be. But that's what our research has helped identify, is like, what are the steps to building a new path?
100%.
We also, I think what we found that was really cool, you mentioned leaders. We found that leaders more likely stick to the plan than individual contributors. People leaders, I know, because I think when I am a leader, I'm like, oh, okay, it's my job to see the forest and the big picture. And so I understand the change. But a lot of times what we found is that leaders are the ones who created the plan. And they've been championing the plan. And so they're kind of going like, no, let's just give it a little more effort. That in fact, leaders were statistically more likely, I know, to want to stick to the plan than individual contributors.
You know, my thoughts are, okay, checks and balances, maybe a board of directors that oversees it, but like, what other strategies can people who are, in the org chart and just don't feel comfortable questioning a strategy, who feel like change is needed, despite the fact that their boss is the one that started that strategy? I think that's a really important point we touch on.
This is a tactic you can use to manage up. So we talked about ways that you can evaluate if a goal makes sense. So it's right, doing that inventory of what resources do we have to put towards this goal versus what resources does it take. And of course, I learned from a friend really early on this beautiful lesson. She taught me every yes is a no to something else. Right? Every goal has a cost. Every pursuit has a price. So if you're spending your resources on a goal, you want to make sure that those resources are actually paying off, because then you're not spending them towards a different goal that could be more successful. So you want to do that evaluation. You want to set those benchmarks. The more you can provide statistics to leadership and not just a gut feeling of like, oh, I don't think this is the right goal. I don't think this is going to be successful. No, show them why you're saying that. Show them the resources that will be used. Show them, hey, we're already not meeting our first benchmarks. The more you can come at them with that concrete response, the better it will be.
Having your own story of resilience, that is really powerful. How does going through something like that transfer over to the work that you do?
Sure. I call what I do content-based motivation, because it's inspiring in style, but it's grounded in this research and strategies. There's a little something for everybody. But what I always say is that, yes, my keynotes are motivational, but they are motivating you to actually do something. I don't just want you to feel motivated. I want you to be motivated to take an action, change a behavior, implement a system, right? Take this strategy and share it with your team. I think my favorite story, when I first delivered this research really early on, I was working for a financial services association, and the meeting professionals had brought me in to work with their clients. I hadn't really had any conversation with the CEO, the head of North America, the head of Europe, but they were all sitting right at the front table for my keynote. It was my first time meeting them. And after my keynote, I came up after I, hugged and met everybody, and the association leaders said, well, we brought you in for our members, but you just ruined everything. And I went, I ruined everything. What do you mean? And they said, well, tomorrow at the end of this conference, our whole staff is meeting to do strategic planning. And thanks to what you taught us about the difference between goals and plans, we just realized that we don't have any goals. All we have are plans. And now we have to go back to the drawing board in the next 24 hours before our strategic planning meeting. We didn't even bring you in for our staff, but now we have to change everything. And I think that's such a compelling narrative. They didn't have to be in the room listening to my keynote. They just brought me in for their members. But they learned the difference between a goal and a plan. And if you want to know what the difference is, if there's just one way to get there, or if it's like step A and then step B will follow and then step C, it's just, like one domino after the other, that's a plan, not a goal.
Absolutely. And a goal is more of an outcome you'd like to see?
Yeah, so a goal is broader. What I tell people to do is a process I call goal supersizing. So your supersized goal is like the biggest possible expression of your goal. It's why you set the goal in the first place. Dan Heath, if you've read his stuff, he says, what is the goal of the goal? And I love that question. Yeah, so all too often, like we confuse goals and plans. We say we have a goal, but it's just like one path. And that is so easy to get knocked off of. That's how you end up with an obstacle. That's how you end up having to change course. Whereas if you've got a supersized goal, then you build what I call parallel plans that allow you to reach that supersized goal. And now all of a sudden, you see how we've gone from this abstract, like, yeah, I'm on board with the concept of adapting, to like, oh, this is the tactic of adapting. Here's how you build the new when you can't do something the way you've always done it.
Talk to me about the use of toxic positivity to motivate people. Maybe it's that leader who has a strategy that everybody except that leader needs to change. Tell me about toxic positivity and how it's used and how to be on alert for it.
Yeah, toxic positivity, you've seen it all over social media. I define it as the belief that your attitude, your positive attitude, earns you the right to the outcome that you want. And that toxic positivity, what it usually does is it crowds out. It says, no negativity, good vibes only. But the reason that toxic positivity doesn't help us, it's actually two reasons. First, you're likely to be disappointed because with toxic positivity, you're ignoring any potential threats, any problems. You're just saying, I'm not even going to listen to that. So you run the risk of being disappointed if you're setting a goal that's not likely to turn out. But the other risk of toxic positivity is that it distracts you. It keeps you wasting your resources on those dead end goals because you're like, oh, if I just work hard enough, it's bound to pay off. And you are now distracted from spending your resources where it's actually going to matter. We are constantly, especially in the association world, being called on to do more with less, to deliver more for members, to do it in a tighter time frame, to make things more personalized for our members. How do we get the younger members engaged and keep them engaged? How do we fill the leadership pipeline? There are so many demands on the association industry. We don't have the time to be distracted with toxic positivity and chasing goals and plans that aren't as likely to pay off where we need them to.
Definitely. It needs to come back to some actual substance, not just positivity for the sake of positivity.
Yeah, people actually feel better chasing hard but realistic goals
No, for
than
sure.
just kind of getting smoke puffed up of like, you can do it, I believe in you.
For sure. I mean, I don't know if you ever like discuss or like think about the difference between being nice and being kind.
I love that distinction that like sometimes being kind is telling someone a hard truth, whereas being nice is surface level.
For sure. And I recently actually kind of learned the difference. So that's why it's kind of top of mind for me. It's like being nice is kind of what you're talking about with the toxic positivity. You're like being polite in your manners, but being and being kind is more the practical implication. It's like the way you are when nobody's looking. It's like the actual substance behind, you I think in New York they talk a lot about kind of people are a little short. I'm an East Coast person myself, so like they talk a lot about the Northeast kind of being like a little short with people, maybe a little more direct. And then I've also heard it be described as, well, no, they're being mean to be nice, or they're being mean to be kind. Like they're telling you move the line forward because they want the 10 other people behind you to get their service quicker too. So it's a little, I think I'm seeing parallels there where like, I think, I'm getting the point now. Like
As a Texan who lived for 8 years in New York City, can confirm.
absolutely. And I mean, I don't want it to get too personal when we talk about New York, but I am like really, I mean, your story is so powerful. If you open to talking about your experience on 9/11, I would love to kind of, as we work towards wrapping, hear about that actual story.
Yeah, so I had just graduated from college. Talk about another life detour. I went to New York to NYU thinking I was going to be a Broadway performer. And I realized my senior year, I love performing, hate the life of a performer. So I already did one big pivot there. And I was working in PR in New York just a couple months after graduation. And so I remember being in Lower Manhattan with my new colleagues, and watching the smoke, watching the buildings just sort of evaporate away from view. And we thought at the time that it was safe to come right back to work. We didn't know that it was the asbestos and the pulverized concrete, the ash, everything that was in the air for all those weeks and months to follow. So luckily I was 16 or 17 blocks north. But still, I guess spending a significant amount of time in that 1.5 mile radius, they say just increased the risk of a lot of health issues, but especially cancer. And it wasn't until after my third round of cancer that my husband helped me put two and two together. So I didn't even know for all these years. I thought I had been issued a bad body at the beginning of my life. But if I hadn't been there and never had gotten cancer, they would not have found the brain aneurysm that was about to hemorrhage. So I had 3 brain surgeries in 8 days to remove the aneurysm before it hemorrhaged. And I have very little deficit from that surgery. So I am not like everything happens for a reason. I think the universe is a lot more complicated than that. But I can say that cancer saved my life. So I weave in those stories in my keynote, just as a jumping off point to help people understand why I did the research. But the reality is we all struggle. We all have to take detours. And so I just use my experience to parallel everyone else's experience.
And do you also try to get the point across that like nothing, I mean, through the story that like nothing is a guarantee and every day is kind of a gift, and never don't put things off because you never know what tomorrow's not guaranteed. And that, I mean, hearing your story, I would assume you look at every day as just a gift. I mean, something that you were not necessarily expected to see without having an incredible story fold out like that.
I do feel that way, Casey. I got to be honest. I don't tell people what they should feel about it, because everybody is at a different place on their roller coaster. And so it's I can say, okay, here's what I believe. I believe that it's not that everything happens for a reason, but I do think it's our job to make meaning of the struggle after it happens. But if somebody is like right fresh in the middle of a struggle, I don't want to tell them how to put a bow on it, because they need to put a bow on it themselves. But I help people get back on a path that feels successful, whether that changes in their personal life or their organization. I help people build a new path. And to me, that ties the bow on it better than telling them how to tie the bow on it.
No, it makes complete and total sense. It's the essence of good coaching too. It's, you can't do it for the other individual.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Randy Pennington, we have to definitely give him another shout out for putting us in touch with you. And I mean, as we work towards wrapping up here, I want to ask two kind of closing questions. One, if there's any final thoughts you have about your work with associations or anything else you wanted to make mention of before we wrap up. And secondly, if there's someone in your network that just super inspiring to you and huge shoes to fill coming off this interview, but anyone else you think that we might benefit from talking to?
I think y'all should talk to Henna Pryor. So, my work on grit and how we've over-indexed on grit is a little counterintuitive. And she's doing some really neat work in what she's calling the signal gap, that gap between the message you intend to send and what people are receiving, which is especially relevant in the age of AI. And sort of the distance between us and the message that other people might be getting. So I'll hook you guys up with Henna Pryor. Definitely talk to her. But really, I want people and their organizations to start thinking about what their supersized goal is. Throw away those goals that are actually plans, because you're going to get derailed so easily. And start thinking in terms of a supersized goal that has multiple ways to reach it. And if people want to check out the first chapter of the shortcut, they can download a free chapter at shortcutbook.com and get a free chapter right there.
Yeah, shortcutbook.com. Link in the description will be there, of course, as well as CourtneyClark.com. I would encourage people to visit as well for anything that might have interested you coming off this conversation. Very easy to find that domain name. Congratulations on snagging that one. CourtneyClark.com. Courtney, thank you so much.
That was hard. That was hard work.
I said it doesn't get any easier than that. So visit that link.
Sometimes I persevere, and sometimes I know when to pivot.
Awesome. Oh, we'll leave it on that note. Courtney, thank you so much for your time today. This has been amazing.
Thanks, Casey. Good to talk to you.